Hello, welcome. I found out today that it is National Free Speech Week, so great timing on our part to have a WeTalk Free Speech Cafe on free speech in the classroom. I'm Jennifer Townsend. I'm the executive assistant here at the Honors College. I also teach part-time for the Honors College and for the Department of Philosophy. I also serve on the WeTalk Advisory Board. The WeTalk group is focused on providing programming and resources to help people learn how to successfully navigate difficult conversations to resolve critical issues at work, home, and throughout the community. Today, joining me to discuss free speech in the classroom are my very special guests, panelists. Please introduce yourselves.
My name is David Roderick. I'm a junior and studying biochemistry.
I'm Bella Prue. I'm a senior. I'm studying English Lit.
My name is Dave Paul. I am a faculty specialist in the Department of Philosophy and currently am also the chairperson in the Department of Philosophy.
Welcome. So, free speech in the classroom. What does that mean to each of you?
To me, I would say it means the ability to say what's on your mind without feeling like people are going to look down at you for speaking your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, a similar thing for me. I think for me, free speech in the classroom is just being able to express what you want to say without fear of being judged by other people or maybe fear that your words will be taken the wrong way.
In my role as a faculty member, I think for me, free speech in the classroom is helping create an opportunity and a space for people to be able to do these things. And in my role as chair, I think free speech in the classroom is an opportunity for me to help facilitate the skills in the faculty in my department to be able to do the same.
Can you tell us from your perspective, Dave, what you see as the main difference between what we hear about academic freedom and free speech? And is there a huge difference there, or?
So I'm not an expert in academic free speech, or academic freedom insofar as, say, the legal use of that is concerned, or as far as the university's implementation of it. I know that there's sometimes disagreement about this, but I think the opportunity to be able to both be a member of an institution and not be sort of demanded to speak for the institution matters. And so I think faculty members can sometimes be seen as speaking for the university, but they're not always speaking for the university, and the opportunity to speak for themselves is important. But also having the freedom to present and discuss material in their classrooms in the way that they see fit, and an acknowledgement of the recognition that they were hired into an institution that recognizes the importance of academic freedom. So it's important, if people are going to be brought into a position where somebody is in effect telling them, we honor and respect not just your command of this discipline, but also your opinions and perspectives about it, that they not then be restrained in expressing those things. But free speech can include, right, disagreeing with somebody about this, disagreeing with somebody who claims expertise, right? I think that matters. But there's, we've talked about this before, there's a difference between civil disagreement and, say, angry or violent disagreement. So yeah, I think civil disagreement is probably the direction forward for an institution as large as this. Yeah.
And so Western's Faculty Senate, as many of you may or may not know, has actually issued a civility statement that is sort of the guiding principle for civil discourse and open inquiry on campus, in that it's encouraged that you have these conversations and that you have these discussions, but you do it in a civil and respectful manner. Do you see that as being an infringement on your right to expression by requiring that you do it in a specific way, or maybe just, offering that guideline of you have to be civil about it because things get heated, people argue. Do you see that as necessary that we have that expectation?
I would say it would be, I don't know if I'd say necessary, but definitely helpful to have that, because depending on the class, there's different environments for different classes. Like a smaller group of, say, 20 to 30 people has a very different environment than a lecture hall with 80 to 100 people in it. So when you're in that smaller group setting, it's a lot easier to get really heated when there's someone who doesn't agree with you, and you end up more so just arguing rather than talking about what's on your mind, and it kind of just devolves into this just yelling at each other back and forth. Whereas if you try to keep it civil, it makes it so that way you are still being respectful to the other person, and it's not just becoming this yelling match back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Classrooms are a learning environment. The goal is to be taught, it's to learn from other people. And when you're in a space where you can have a respectful discussion, where you might be on completely opposite sides of the aisle, but you're having a discourse, you're learning from each other, that's just far more productive, especially in an academic setting, than an argument is. And I mean, I don't think it's unreasonable to have that sort of guideline or expectation in place. I've never personally experienced any people like actually arguing in a classroom before, but doesn't sound productive or fun for anyone involved. I don't know very many people who like to get yelled at or to yell at other people, so.
Do you have any anecdotes about your experiences in the classroom where you've had, where civil discourse has been successful, or when you've been able to freely exchange differing viewpoints, or when you've sort of been shut down?
I've experienced both. Not to brag on you, but if you guys don't know, Jennifer Townsend teaches a class on seeing things differently. It's all about understanding other people's point of view, and David and I were both in that class. And there was an exercise that we did where we took some of the most difficult and controversial topics that were around, and this was later in the semester by the time we were all friends and had respect for each other. And she asked us to go on opposite sides of the room, depending on which side of the aisle you were on. And I remember it was pretty split, and then we got to some of the seriously controversial ones, and I ended up being on the side of the room where there were only 2 people. And for once in my life, not being majority agreed with wasn't scary, and we had a respectful conversation where it was generally a pretty heated topic where people get their feelings hurt, or where people really say hurtful things, but we just had a respectful discussion where we tried to understand each other. And that was really helpful, because it's not like any of us walked out of that room having changed our minds, but we learned something new about each other and humanized, the people who we would generally consider to be the other, which I find to be an unhelpful term, but so that was a good example. I've also been on the other side of that, where it was in a classroom where we didn't often express our own viewpoints, and a controversial opinion came up, actually the same one. And it got to the point where some people in class were just speaking freely. They assumed everyone in the room agreed with them, and they pretty much ended the discussion with, "Gosh, I hate those people." And those people were me. And I just felt this I don't know, part of me wanted to say something, but I was like, I don't feel like getting singled out in this class right now. And the discussion seemed to be moving on, so I just sat there and took it, but it really affected my learning for the rest of the day. And so I've been on both sides of that before.
I would say I've definitely experienced the former, where it felt good to have that conversation with someone. Again, in your class, it was when we were all given this list of controversial topics, and we had to say what our views on each one was. Then we were paired up with one person who had the opposite view on one of the topics, and we had to discuss our views with that. And this was one of the earlier assignments we had to do, and for me, met with this girl I'd never really talked to other than once or twice before, and we talked got to know each other, and I saw things from a perspective I hadn't seen before, and she saw things that she hadn't thought of before, and now we still talk to each other quite often, and it was just really helpful to see other people's perspectives on something that I'd already had my ideas about, because it's always helpful to get a bigger idea of what's going on, and it's always great to talk to someone that does disagree with you so you have that further understanding. As far as the opposite, where I haven't really experienced too much where my ideas have been really shot down, and it's not a very open environment just because of the nature of the classes I've been taking. But I can definitely see how that would come up depending on the classes you are in.
Do you have any thoughts, Dave?
So it's been a while since I've been a student, so I don't, I don't know that I can speak to my experience in that capacity. But one of the things I try to do in the classrooms that I do teach, and one of the things that I try to persuade others who teach, especially discussion-based courses, to consider, is the value in normalizing these sorts of conversations across differences early on and to continue maintaining them throughout the semester. Because sometimes a discussion opportunity might avail itself that if the folks in the room, whether they're students or the instructor or anybody else, if they haven't developed some skill in facilitating these things, sometimes an opportunity can be lost. So sometimes a topic might come up in a class that would be great to talk about, but people are afraid. People are afraid to talk about it. And insofar as very often, not always, students may see the instructor as having a leadership role there, having that person have the skills, knowledge, and perspectives to be able to facilitate a conversation, especially a hard conversation where there is an opportunity for people to be, to disagree strongly, but to facilitate it in a way to get back to the Faculty Senate statement on civility, to have the discussion in a useful way. All of these things are very important, and so it's valuable for there to be a statement that says we honor these things and respect these things, and we have a strong desire for faculty and students to engage in these sorts of ways. That's good. Offering opportunities for people to develop these capacities is also good. And I think, and they do exist. I don't think everybody's aware of them, but they do exist. And so I think there are ways of making sure that that these sorts of strong disagreements or opportunities to shut conversations down, there's maybe training is the wrong word, guidance maybe, so that people can develop the skills to maintain this.
Is there anything that stands out to you that certain instructors, you don't have to brag about me again, do better than others to help facilitate discussion in the classroom? You can brag about me if you want. I was going to
say, you're the only professor I've had who has outright said, we're going to disagree with each other, be civil. Like, I mean, I'm in a lot of discussion-based classes now. Due to the nature of my degree, most of that discussion is just talking about books. But you know, when you do that sort of thing, you can put yourself into that and you can like express your own opinions. But like I've had teachers who before have been good at facilitating discussion and making sure we're, steering away if we're getting too close to like a serious disagreement. But I've never had anyone outright set the expectation. Like you said, if anything gets heated, if anyone is rude to anyone, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave. Like, this is a place where everyone should be able to feel free to express their opinions. And maybe for other classes that's too drastic, but definitely setting, I don't know, the precedent that this class is going to be a place where everyone can speak their mind and try to respectfully understand other people was very helpful to me going into that environment.
Yeah, I'd say pretty much the same, where your class is one of the only real discussion based that I've had, so that's just most of my experience, but it was really helpful to just get it right out on day one to say, we're not all going to agree, because that's just human nature. You won't agree about everything. Nobody will. And it's not about proving that your ideas are right or that theirs are wrong. It's about learning that sometimes the truth lies in between the two ideas, and the only way to find that truth is to work with the people who you disagree with and you don't see eye to eye with. And that's how you find what really matters. And that's what really stood out in your class, was how it was always talking with people who you don't normally have these types of conversations with, and those are the ones that are the most beneficial.
I just would like our audience to know that I did not set this up as an advertisement for my class.
It's a good class. You should take it.
So part of this might be a benefit of happening to be somebody who teaches philosophy classes. But in some of my courses, especially the applied courses, I assign essays for my students to read from a variety of perspectives on an issue, and I challenge everybody to disagree with everything they read. And what I mean by that is, it's easy to disagree with authors we disagree with. It's a little harder to disagree with authors we agree with. And so I challenge my students to find something in an essay that they agree with, find something to disagree with. In an essay that they disagree with everything, find something to agree with, and then challenge that. And I use that as an opportunity to then put people in a situation where their practice disagreeing with what they read can translate into practice disagreeing with each other in conversations. So disagreement is a valuable skill. It's difficult in a culture that rewards conformity and agreement, but it can be done, yeah.
There is a lot of controversy these days about safe spaces on campus and whether or not they should exist and what purpose they really serve. Van Jones has said he doesn't want you to come to campus and be safe. He wants you to be unsafe, to challenge your perspectives on things and to spread your wings and get tough. And so if you're in a classroom and you're presented with a challenging idea that may make you uncomfortable, is there a value to you that you can see in trigger warnings? Do they serve a valuable purpose, or do you think they're necessary? Or do they take away from the conversation?
For me, it depends on context, I guess. I think in some situations, like in a class where you don't tend to discuss topics that could be potentially triggering, I think there is some merit to giving people a heads up. I do know that it sometimes goes the other way, that heads up can make people more anxious about the topic they're approaching. So it really is, to me, it depends. It's something I don't necessarily have a lot of experience with or have like really concrete thoughts on, but I do know that, I don't know, it can be helpful to some people. If you're in a class where you're discussing controversial or triggering topics all of the time, then at that point you've come to expect it. And I feel like at that point it is good to be challenged in that sort of way, I guess.
Yeah, I don't have too many concrete ideas on it either, just because it's something I've never really come up with personally. But I can see how some instances they would be helpful if someone does suffer from anxiety about a specific topic or something like that, how if it's something that they're not comfortable with and it would put them in a bad space mentally, it would be a good idea to avoid it. But I can also see how a lot of times getting yourself out there and putting yourself somewhere that you're not comfortable a lot of times is what you need to grow and develop as a person, and it's the challenges that make you who you are. So I can see how sometimes just putting yourself out there, and even if you're not comfortable with the topic, at least trying to express yourself and try to think about it differently and think about it some way that's not how you usually do, a lot of times that's what helps you grow the most. So I think, again, it depends on the context, where if it's something that comes up often, like Bella was saying, in that type of class, then I feel like you shouldn't have the trigger warnings, because then it just takes away from the discussion. But if it's something where it might only be like one topic for the entire course of the semester that could be triggering to some people, it does have its benefits then, I would say.
There are things that I probably wouldn't talk about on the first day of class that I probably would talk about in the middle of the semester. So as a for instance, it just happens to be the case that one of the courses I teach is a course on biomedical ethics. And so we have to talk about issues that may come up for care providers. And care providers can run quite a spectrum. Mental health care providers, doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists, occupational therapists, nutritionists, there's this huge range. And there are topics that come up in this field that can be a real challenge to talk through. So one of the topics that comes up in the course is how to respond to patients who make requests to have aid in ending their lives when, for instance, they have advanced cancer. So before we get to that topic, though, I've spent 5 or 6 weeks developing spaces in the classroom for students to have frank discussions with one another. So somebody who might feel a certain way or be persuaded to think things are a certain way has an opportunity to be open to what other people are saying. But what I wouldn't do is, on the first day of class, say, let's have a discussion about suicide with, honestly, a bunch of students who, frankly, have probably in the last few years had to deal with classmates and friends who've either experienced directly or on the tangent this topic. I think that could be unnerving for some people. It could be unnerving for some people to know that they're going to talk about this, to know ahead of time they're going to talk about this. So I think the safe space issue is multifaceted. One is the importance of developing a space that the students will decide. Students will decide for themselves anyway whether a classroom is a safe space. I can tell students, hey, this is a safe space. The students will decide for themselves whether it's that isn't really up to me. But what I can try to do is I can try to create an environment where they do decide on their own that it is. And when I do this, I can then, I have a lot more room to say, hey, everybody, don't forget, like next week, we're going to talk about this thing. And just be prepared ahead of time, whatever that means for you, and just be aware that everybody else, they may be less willing to discuss than normal. That's okay. Let them be who they are. Yeah. So I think there's ways to. It's not either a safe space or not. It's not either trigger warning or not. I think there's a lot of room inside all of that. Yeah.
Sort of a trigger warning without a trigger warning.
Sure. Yeah.
From your perspective as faculty member, do you purposely put limits on what you will allow to be discussed in the classroom?
I suppose I would, right? I mean, I could imagine somebody wanting to talk about something in the classroom, or wanting to talk about something in a way that I was unprepared to deal with. But by saying that, I don't mean that I would shut it down entirely. I might say something like, let's table that for next time. But I create limits by normalizing that discussions will have a duration. And at the end of the duration, each of the groups that have a conversation will have either an opportunity or an obligation, depending on how I've set things up, for somebody in that group to speak about what came up that they can share with the group, this sort of thing. So I can build limits on that to prevent things from getting to a point where I would feel uncomfortable facilitating. But creating an environment where people feel that they can have the discussions on topics that push boundaries is, I think, good, because it gives people an opportunity to say, well, we've talked about this, but I want to talk about this other thing that they might not ask in another class, and I want them to have that opportunity. So I try to build, I don't know, flexible boundaries that are pretty far away, but I don't think I would go anywhere. Yeah.
Do you think that there should be limits on what you're allowed to say in the classroom as students?
I would say I think it depends on what class it is, because all these classes have different tones to them. If it's a smaller class about, like, say our philosophy class that had about 20 people in it and it's about seeing things differently, I don't think there really should be a limit because it allows you to open up your mind. Whereas if it's a larger lecture hall with 80, 100 people in it, or if it's something like calculus or organic chemistry, that's you're just there to learn the topic and you're not really trying to push these boundaries, so to speak, those aren't really the right time or place to talk about some of these issues. So I think it depends on a case-by-case basis of finding the right time and place and the right class to bring this up.
Yeah, I mean, I think context is everything. Like you said, I feel like if I took, like, I don't know, a math class and I'm sitting in there and the person next to me all of a sudden is like, I want to talk about discrimination. I'm like, I'm just trying to learn the quadratic equation, leave me alone. Like, but if we're in, like, a setting where discussion is encouraged, I think so long as you're respectful, so long as you're, keeping in mind that the people around you have their own opinions and their own lived stories and all of that stuff, like, have that discussion, be respectful, try to learn something from the person around you. But I mean, the worst thing I think that can happen in any sort of frank discussion where you're trying to learn something about the other person or what they believe is not sharing everything that you believe. Because if you put any sort of filter on, then you're not fully expressing what you need to express and they're not fully understanding your point. So I think there's something to be said, and I'm sure we'll end up talking about it, about like hate speech or speech that's delivered in an angry or judgmental sort of way. But if you're just being frank about something that you believe, I think so long as you can both be mature about it, there shouldn't necessarily be limits to what you say.
Well, let's talk about hate speech. So you can find online a panel that we did on hate speech last spring for WeTalk, and how we discussed that hate speech is what we think of as hate speech is technically allowed under the First Amendment. Although we may not like it, it is speech that is protected. What happens when hateful speech enters the classroom setting? Have you experienced it at all? I don't imagine, I haven't heard a lot of that happening on campus. I think this is a pretty welcoming campus for the most part, but I don't know because I'm not a student. So, and if it does present itself, what are your suggestions or thoughts on how to deal with that when it is sort of thrown out there? When does your right to speak end because it's infringing on someone else's rights on the broader spectrum, the right to learn, their right to experience a safe place to learn?
Right. I've never experienced hate speech, really. I mean, aside from the one time that someone said they hated a people group I was a part of, but that was very laissez-faire. Maybe it could have been taken as a joke. I've never experienced anyone like sit down and maybe like, I don't know, say a slur or something. Like, I've never experienced anything like that before. But I have like had times when someone started to like express themselves in a way that maybe could be more negative and could be a bit more pointed. And I've seen students in class like kind of give them like a heads up, like, okay, maybe we don't say that, or I've seen them change the topic, or, and I think honestly it's important for the students to be mindful of each other, because it's our learning environment. If someone saying something is stopping you from learning, it's just like telling someone to be quiet when you're trying to listen in class. Like, if it's infringing upon, your rights to learn and, your right to exist in that space, I think it's you can absolutely say something. I don't think you can necessarily say, hey, shut up because I want you to, or just because you're not allowed to say that. Like, anyone's allowed to say whatever they want, but that doesn't mean there's no consequences for what they say. Like, I don't know. And if that doesn't stop it, if the student isn't far enough, I think it would be up to the faculty just to be like, okay, let's move on, or, you know, hey, I need you to stop saying that. Like, I feel like there's a couple of different steps that can be taken, because sometimes people don't know they're doing it, is what I found, is that people, when they speak, especially in discussion-based classroom settings, where it's not established that we all disagree, they tend to think, at least in my experience, that everyone agrees with them. I know I'm guilty of this. Sometimes I make broad statements and assume the whole room is on my side, which isn't the case. We all have very different experiences, so.
Yeah, hate speech isn't something that I've experienced personally, and it's not something I think would really come up in the classroom too often, maybe once in a while. But I could definitely see it coming up on campus, like outside of the classroom or something like that. And I think the most important thing to remember is to just always try to be civil when it comes up. Just because somebody is saying hurtful things towards you doesn't give you the right to start saying hurtful things to them. You have to try and, I guess, be the bigger person in the situation and show that it's not about putting the other person down, because that's not why we're here. We're here at the university to learn and grow and hopefully become better people. And hate speech isn't part of that. Hate speech will never help you become a better person. So when it comes up, the most important thing is to just try and talk to them, help them realize that what they're saying might not be helpful, and try and, again, just be civil about it. Don't use it as an excuse to lash out at them. Use it as a reason to show your characteristics and show who you truly are.
Have you had experience with students in your classrooms maybe going a little too far, Dave? And what have you done?
To some degree, yeah. So, Bello, did you mention that sometimes people don't realize? Was that, yeah. So I think there's a couple different things that come to mind here. One is, you're right, sometimes people say something, don't realize that it's hurtful. But that's, again, an opportunity for somebody else in the room who does realize it's hurtful to step into that space and say, it's interesting what you just said. Did you mean this? Phrase it another way. After all, I could have taken it to mean this. Or in my case, I have friends who've heard similar sorts of things and it hurt them because. Give an opportunity for somebody, if they don't know that what they're saying is hurtful, so rather than hate speech, maybe hurtful speech, to recognize how it could be. Oh, I got it. I've never experienced that before, and if somebody said that to me, it wouldn't hurt me. But now that you've explained it, I can understand how this would be hurtful to somebody else in this other context. So I can choose to be mindful now that I'm aware. Whereas if I wasn't aware, I maybe couldn't have even chosen to be mindful. So there's an opportunity there, I think, that's helpful. So I think on the impact side, right, how will my words land? I'm not always going to know how my words are going to land. There may be people to whom I'm speaking, and I just don't know that they may take something I say in a way that I don't intend. First, if my default is to respond to somebody who says, hold on, that really bothers me. If my default is to say, oh, no, you misunderstood, I didn't mean that, I'm losing an opportunity. I could begin with, wow, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that, right? Which, on the free speech side of things, is a concern I've raised before. So I've worked for organizations where I literally was prevented from saying I'm sorry if I did something that I felt that I needed to say that I was sorry, for liability reasons. So that's a really interesting, it's really interesting to be a member of an organization and to be prevented from apologizing, right? So what are the limits of free speech? Wow, I can't say I'm sorry. That's an interesting limit on free speech. But I think it's really valuable to point out that there, as you said, there's consequences of our speech. Sometimes they're for things we wouldn't have dreamed of at the beginning of the day. And so finding ways to navigate all of these spaces is complicated and interesting. But yeah, things have come up in the classroom. Sometimes I've steered away from them. Sometimes I've steered toward them. Sometimes it's dependent on where we are in the semester, on where we are in the day. Creating ways to be respectful. So it's one thing to say, let's all be respectful. It's another way to say, and here's how we're going to do that. When the verdict came down and then the next day Ferguson was in flames, I was teaching a course, and that afternoon sort of waves went through my classroom and people weren't interested in the material in front of them. So I changed the conversation. I said, let's talk about this. Let's have a frank discussion about this, which was difficult. There were times in my life I wouldn't have been able to do this. By the way, I said earlier that there are ways of facilitating these things. I had participated in a year of a learning community on campus about privilege, power, and difference. Part of that learning community gave me some of the skills to do this. And the learning community wasn't designed for faculty, but still it gave me some of the skills to do this. And one of the things I did was, because of the time we were in the semester, I said, all right, everybody, we've had some conversations before. This is a really volatile topic. Some of you won't have a chance to talk about this in any classroom for the rest of the day, and some of you may need to get something out. So here's my proposal. We'll raise hands. I'll call on somebody, and after they're done talking, nobody will say anything for 60 seconds. It doesn't matter what you feel. It doesn't matter what you think. This is what I'm going to do to facilitate respectful conversation. Instead of just saying, let's be respectful, I said, here's how we can be respectful. And then after that minute's up, if somebody would like to respond, we'll give an opportunity for a response. And then we'll give 60 seconds before anything else. And it worked really well. It worked really, really well. So there was an opportunity to build into the discussion a way for the discussion to happen in a respectful, civil way. And I think that was very helpful. It was helpful for me. I think it was helpful for the students.
So do you then see value in purposely bringing controversial topics into the classroom? And what happens when, say, half the classroom says, well, I have no opinion about that topic? What do you suggest to move that conversation forward? You've experienced these conversations, and so I'm sure you've experienced your classmates or your peers saying, well, I don't have an opinion about that. I just don't care. I'm not informed about it. So how do we encourage difficult conversation over controversial things with students who either don't have time to be informed or don't want to be informed or don't find these topics to be important? What can we do to engage you with the world more?
I think the biggest thing is to just stress how, even though something might not affect you personally right now, maybe someday in the future it could affect you or somebody that you know and care about. Or maybe if it doesn't affect you, there's somebody out there that it does affect. So if it's not important to you, it's important to somebody else. And that's what makes all of these different topics so controversial, is they're so important to so many different people. And even if you don't have much of an opinion on it yourself, it's still beneficial to talk about it with the people who are informed. So that way you can get that understanding of why it's important to these people. And it helps you learn what their thought process on it is, and maybe think about it some way that you hadn't thought about it before.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've had conversations about topics that I wasn't informed about before, especially in your classroom setting. Like, there were a lot of controversial opinions and topics that I honestly didn't even know were a thing I was like, oh, what's that? And then everybody else had to be like, oh, it's this, or actually it's this. And then, we started to get some of the dissent coming out. But honestly, if, like in your example, half the class knows and has an opinion and the other half of the class doesn't, I mean, at that point, let the people who know and care talk. Like, I don't know, have them present their ideas, and then maybe that will encourage the other half of the class to like get some idea. Honestly, I don't know if I can say it any better than David did. They're controversial because a lot of people care, and they care about different aspects of this umbrella topic. Some people really care about this thing, and some people really care about this, and so it's interesting if you fall in the middle, and I'm a very middle ground person. If you fall in the middle or if you don't care, it is really interesting being in a room full of people who really care one way or the other. And on topics that I didn't have any previous knowledge of, hearing about people who really cared one way and really cared the other way helped me to inform my own, belief on the topic based on my own convictions and my own sets of core values and all of that. So I don't know. I mean, talking about it will help people to care.
Do you have any ideas, Dave?
Yeah, so I intentionally design topics design readings for topics so that the students in my classes who maybe hadn't thought about the issues before or wouldn't have considered themselves informed, or maybe would have considered themselves informed but were unaware of views that they didn't have. So I begin with, we're going to read this piece. I want you to think about what they're saying, and I want you to recognize that the person who's offering this, so this may be different from some other topics, the person who's saying this is then going to give you the very best reasons they can think of to try to convince you to agree with them. So can you find those very good reasons? Do you think they're really good reasons? And if you don't think they're really good reasons, why? And then can you give an opposite or an alternative perspective? And then I'll throw at them another piece by another author who completely disagrees with the first and gives very good reasons to believe something else. And so rather than put my students in a situation where maybe they haven't been informed, they may still not know what side they fall on an issue, or they may think of themselves as in the middle of an issue, but they won't come into the topic uninformed. So they will at least be aware that there are a variety of alternative perspectives, and not just perspectives, but people who've given those perspectives have given what they have thought of as very good reasons for why they have those views and why they think you should have those views too. Right, so I try to sort of welcome the space of, well, let's inform people first and then have a discussion about it, yeah.
Is there anything that Western faculty, instructors can be doing better to facilitate a free exchange of ideas in the classroom, or even just throughout campus in general? Or Western administrators even? Western in general, the big umbrella of Western. What can we be doing better?
I think the biggest thing is to just provide the opportunity to have the discussions, because we have, like here we have WeTalk, where we have this place where the three of us get to share our ideas on it, and we get some feedback from people, and it lets us discuss our viewpoints. But I don't see too many instances of opportunities for that to happen, because that's really where you get the most out of it, is when you have constant opportunities to discuss these topics with people. And there are like discussions classes like your class, but for people like me in a science related major, most of their classes aren't discussion based, so you never really have the opportunity to do something like that. So I think providing multiple opportunities that are welcoming for all students to show up and attend, because a lot of times I see groups where it's like only this group of people are welcome to show up, or this is catering towards this specific group of people. So when you only have that one group where people generally agree for the most part, you don't really have these tough discussions. So when you have anyone can show up, that's when you get the differing viewpoints, and you really get down to the discussions that help you learn and grow.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a classroom space where these sort of discussions can be had, facilitate them in a respectful manner. If not, honestly, I think if we're talking Western as a whole, like opportunities for people kind of like this to like show up and learn maybe about something they don't know, or, you know, a topic that they might not agree on, or kind of like David said, like, I don't know. Western is pretty good about inclusivity. I'll hand him that. Like, you know, it's like, oh, everyone's welcome. Let's come to these things. But we do have like, you know, RSO or different things that are really catered to certain like different groups of people. And even if that's just like hobbies or interests, like you can still get a lot of really similar viewpoints when you get with people who all have, you know, your hobby. But even then there's splits. But I mean, encouraging students to have those discussions outside of the classroom, I feel like, because I know that in the classroom I'm there to learn, and I'm there to learn about the topic that the class is about. And if the class isn't about, let's shake up your whole worldview, time to change your beliefs, like learn about other people. If it's not a class like that, I wouldn't say force it, because that can make people uncomfortable. They might not be prepared for that. They might not be in a place in their life where they're ready to change their mind or attempt to learn something about someone else. But encouraging students to be open and respectful with each other outside of a classroom space, I think, is really important, especially because once we do leave the classroom, we tend to gravitate towards people who we agree with, you know. College is really cool in the fact that it's a bunch of people who might have never met each other, who don't have even a little similar interests, can all gather in one space and learn under that same roof. And so encouraging them to continue to seek out people who think differently and continuing to seek out those difficult conversations is really important.
Yeah, so I'm not in a position to say what administrators should do better, but I can say, no, but I can say that very many things have been done well. So there's a lot that is happening, or that has happened, that people just don't know about. There's been amazing work done in athletics for the last year, for instance, that frankly a huge number of people are unaware of, on issues of diversity, both in particular, both race and gender issues have been brought to the attention by student athletes themselves, saying, hey, let's make some progress on some of these things. And folks in the employ of the university stepped into that space and said, hey, yeah, let's do that. Let's not just do it, let's do it really well. I think that we're doing the same thing with, say, viewpoint diversity, right? So first, I think there are some folks who might say, viewpoint diversity isn't what I mean by diversity. Well, let's be inclusive and let's bring viewpoint diversity into diversity. And so we are, right? We're doing this. And it may be slow and it may be bumpy, and I can look around the room and say, who isn't included? Who have we not, we've tried to reach out to people, who did we miss? And what can we do better to not miss them next time? Maybe they don't want to be here. Okay, do we know that, right? So there are things we can continue to do. So yeah, I think there are things that we're doing well, and I think there's things that we can do better, and I think collectively, trying to find out what those things are is probably the way to go, not to have some person say, I know what we're doing wrong, and I'm going to, put that on everybody to fix. Yeah. So there are things we're doing quite well, things we're not, and we have opportunities to move forward, and I think we're embracing some of them. So I think that's good.
Thank you very much. I don't have any other questions. I'm hoping some of you have questions for our lovely panelists. Please speak up, and if you do, I'll give you a cookie. And that's not a joke. I have cookies and they're delicious. And they are yours if you can ask a question. Everybody's already on break mentally. All right, great.
Is there a legal definition to hate speech? And if there is not, how do you safeguard the slippery slope of who decides what hate speech is?
So I'm not a lawyer. And unfortunately, the lawyer that used to host our free speech cafes is no longer at Western. So I will field this question as best I can. What we think of as hate speech or hateful speech or hurtful speech is speech that is protected under the First Amendment. And so then you have to consider, if you're going to put in place rules or laws regarding hurtful speech or hateful speech, who do you want making those laws? That becomes a very dangerous proposition in my view. You know, depending on who's in power at any given moment in the country is going to be the person who's going to say what you are and are not allowed to say. And at that point, is this still the United States of America? If we can't criticize our government, which was, you know, the very first amendment in the Bill of Rights, then we're not really us anymore, right? So I think that for the most part, legislation has safely steered away from that. I think that politicians are wise to not head down that path because it is a very dangerous one. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I got one. So we're talking a lot about like student to student. So say for in a scenario where it's like teacher to student, right? Say the teacher has a certain ideal of how things should be or whatnot. So how do you balance that? Because it's like kind of more difficult. Because if you step on the wrong toes, next thing you know, grades might go down or it might be worse experience.
Yeah, I've had students express to me that they're afraid to say what they really think in the classroom because they know what their instructor thinks. And what they think is different than what their instructor thinks. And they're afraid that that's going to be reflected in their grade. They're afraid of retaliation from other students, but mainly they're worried about their grade and how the instructor is going to treat them throughout the rest of the semester. And I think that's a valid concern. It's perfectly reasonable to feel that way. My solution to that as an instructor is to be very careful about not sharing my perspective on a topic that we're discussing because I don't want to influence what my students are going to say about it. I want them to be able to feel like they can speak freely about what they really think without worrying about either saying what they think I want them to say or keeping quiet because they know that I disagree with them. And I think that that's probably my best piece of advice for other instructors, if anyone cared, is to keep your own perspective out of it. You're not there to tell students what you think about President Biden or President Trump. You're there to say, here are different ways of thinking about a topic, explore them.
So there are a lot of very strong opinions by different people. Sometimes when you have strong opinions about something, you can kind of bend the truth into things that you want to be true. And it's good. How in free speech settings or discussions can you regulate the truth versus stretch?
Thoughts? I'm not sure about that one. I mean, if we don't know what the truth actually is, you know, first, should we be regulating it? You have every right to come in and lie about what you think about something, right? Without knowing what the objective truth is going in advance, I don't think that there's really anything that we can sort of mitigate in that instance. I don't know. What do you think, Dave?
Depends on the context.
Yeah.
So in the classroom, students have rights and responsibilities, and faculty have rights and responsibilities. And it would be irresponsible, for instance, of me as a faculty member to portray falsehoods as truth. And the institution should hold me to account for that. I shouldn't lie to students and say, no, that's not plagiarism, if it is, for instance, right? No, there are things about which I could be speaking falsehoods, and it would be dangerous for other people to believe me. Mm-hmm. And so whether we can do that at the flagpoles and conversationally, whether we can do that in a residence hall, is separate from what I can do professionally. So I do have responsibilities. Do students have those responsibilities? wmich.edu/conduct. Turns out the answer is yes. Students do have responsibilities. Insofar as students are students at Western Michigan University, they have agreed to accept certain standards and responsibilities. Insofar as students are people protected by the First Amendment, they can say what they'd like. They can espouse falsehoods as truth. It may not turn out well for them as students, but it may turn out well for them as people. So yeah, there's a lot of room here. Yeah.
So don't lie on your papers.
Yes.
But if you're just talking to David, I can't really tell you not to lie because that's not my place.
I mean, like, also even in like a one-to-one conversation, like if we were having a conversation and I believed something that you would, perceive to be a lie, I might not know that it's not, well, maybe not a lie, but I might not know that I'm spreading misinformation or disinformation. That might be something I've consumed and believe, and I'm just sharing it with you because those are my thoughts. I might not have gone in and done the research and realized, oh, wait, that's actually not factual. Like, some people have hard and fast opinions without looking into them. And at that point, I think it can be up to you whether or not you say, hey, actually, I know this to be false because X, Y, and Z. I mean, at that point, you're willingly entering into discourse. They might go, hey, that's not true because I read it here. And you're like, well, that's not true because eventually you're just going to have a conversation. So I don't know. If you want them to understand that it's not true, I guess talk to them about it would be what I would do.
Yeah, I would say it's, again, within the classroom, in a professional setting, a lot of times I don't see too many benefits for it, but maybe part of it is what you're saying you might not know is false. It might be something that you've read it online, so you thought, like, that person who wrote it did their research, so that means if they're knowledgeable about it, then what they said is right. But sometimes those people didn't do their research and you're just taking what they say at face value. Sometimes you might believe it to be true when in reality it's not the truth. So I feel like that's one of the hard things, is knowing whether what you believe is true, knowing if it actually is true or not. But other times, saying something that you know is false could sometimes lead into a greater discussion. Like if you're playing, say you're playing devil's advocate in a discussion, just so that way you get the other people involved thinking more deeply about the conversation, about their stance. Even if what you're saying you don't truly believe in, or you don't believe it's the fact of the matter, it gets other people to think about something and maybe consider something differently. So I think it depends on, again, the right time and place to say these sorts of things.
So I got to I entirely agree with that. And part of it is because I think that we are responsible for our speech. And when we are speaking untruths and we know that they're untrue, I think that there is some concern about the damage that speech can do. One of the things I tell my students, I teach a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion classes, is that we go into every space we do with the most powerful weapon we have. And that weapon is our words. And so I think we have to speak them very carefully. In an educational institution, we are regulated. We're regulated by time, place, and manner with our speech. And in a classroom, that manner is academic responsibility with the speech that we are using. So I don't know that there's room for untruths, even if it's about being against academic, if we knowingly speak.
Any other questions? Yes.
First question is just to know what are the advices that you can give to a student, for example, who think that there's no benefits to speak, especially against the content which is being taught in the classroom. Just for example, I remember personally, we were being taught in the class, in the psychology class, that, this is what's happening. It was influenced by these scientists. But for me, I think there were a lot of cases and evidence and facts that was disproving what we were being taught. But just because I knew that this was taught, and it has always been like this, like for many years, I thought that maybe it would be beneficial, I'm sorry, my English, it would be beneficial to speak about it, or say that, or maybe there's it's wrong to still have that kind of system of communication when we have proven evidence and facts that this what we are being told right now is no longer valid. You see? So about that fear of speaking about it, what would you advise?
Well, I don't think that I have any good advice for getting over the fear itself, and having experienced that as a student where I disagreed with something that I was being taught. It took a lot for me to decide to speak up about it. And in that case, I didn't speak to my instructor. I went to the department chair instead. That was a little more comfortable for me, because I feared that retaliation from the instructor. And you start, I think there's a level of questioning yourself too. This is the expert who's teaching the class. Obviously, they know better than I do, even though you have evidence to the contrary. I would say if you can find a way to respectfully bring up what you've discovered in the classroom, it's an opportunity for everyone to learn from that and to explore other ideas, the other ideas that may actually be true more recently than what's currently still in your syllabus. It's just, you have to be brave, I guess, which can be tough. But I don't think that you should let the fear stop you. As long as I think we should all be respectful. I think there is value in the civility expectation. But I think that we should be encouraging our students to ask these questions and to not be afraid to explore other ideas, because maybe we are wrong. I tell my students all the time, maybe I'm wrong about this, and I would love for you to let me know if I am, because I don't want to continue to spread misinformation. I don't want to be responsible for the wrong things to be out there in the world, because I tell you, and then you tell someone else, and they tell someone else, and it's just a snowball effect. So if my students are comfortable enough that they can respectfully bring up a disagreement with me, then I welcome it. I realize not all instructors are like that. But just be brave.
There are opportunities. Sometimes they exist and sometimes they don't. I agree with Jen. If you find yourself in a situation where you believe or know something to be true, and it conflicts with what you're being taught, if it isn't safe to bring it up with the instructor, don't bring it up with the instructor. But there may be other opportunities. Department chair, somebody else on campus, a trusted faculty member in another area, that can put them in a strange position. But it's happened to me where people have come to me and said, I need to tell you about something that's happening in this other department. Okay, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Just what you said. What do you mean by if it is safe? How do you define safe?
So safety could be, I'm not speaking about physical safety, I'm talking about retaliation. So if you have reason to believe you will be retaliated against in the classroom, if your grade will be diminished, if you won't be respected as a student, something like this, that's not safe for a student. The opportunity for you to be safe as a student ought to be there, and if it's not, there are other people on campus to talk to about trying to make that happen. Yeah.
Okay, well, oh, all right, last question.
I just want to say something in defense of faculty being open to being disagreed with, because I mentioned it to this next to me who expressed that fear. I think that fear is really more, than it should be. The fear of saying, of disagreeing with the faculty member. I think, and I could be wrong, but I think most faculty members welcome, they're into debate and discussion and would welcome respectfully delivered challenges. So I wouldn't want people to go away thinking that that's like a real thing that people have to worry about. Is if you disagree with something your instructor said, then your grade is going to go down. I don't know a lot of people in these classes. I think that know that. So I'm not worried so much about that.
But I appreciate that, and I certainly hope that is true for most of our faculty on campus. That should certainly be the goal anyway, that we all have the opportunity to learn from each other every day. Everyone you meet has something to teach you if you give them the opportunity. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this evening. To keep up to date with other WeTalk activities, check out the WeTalk website, sign up for the mailing list, and I did kind of tell you a lie. Everyone can have a cookie. They're at the table on your way out. Please help yourself. And please also take the time to complete our survey. And you can leave those on the table as well, or you can submit them. There's an electronic way to do that as well. Thank you so much, everyone.